The banquet hall shimmered with crystalline light refracted from the vaulted ceiling of the Elveran consulate dome, each curve of the architecture humming with subtle frequencies only partially within human hearing. Captain Dorian Vale stood stiffly near the back of the ceremonial table, adjusting the collar of his midnight blue fleet uniform. Around him, dignitaries laughed in low tones, glasses clinked with syrupy alien spirits, and translators whispered cultural cues into discreet earpieces. He hated events like this. Too much pomp, too many unspoken rules, too many memories. The trade talks had gone well, surprisingly well, considering Elveran pride and Earth's desperation to secure safe passage through the Sullen Rift. But when the High Matron herself rose and raised her crystalline staff, Dorian sensed something was coming. Something not in the protocol briefings. "We of Elveron," she announced, her voice ringing like wind chimes over ice, "wish to honor this accord not only with words and contracts, but with a living bond." At her gesture, a pair of robed elders emerged from the arched doorway at the far end of the hall. Between them walked a woman. She was tall, barefoot, and eerily graceful, her golden skin seeming to catch the light and hold it like a soft flame. Her hair, long and silver blonde, moved with a current of its own, thin bioluminescent threads glowing faint blue and green in time with her heartbeat. She wore a ceremonial robe white with silver embroidery woven in patterns that danced when Hanstone looked at too long. Her wrists were adorned with bands of copper fused with quartz crystal, humming faintly with encoded energy. She stopped directly in front of Dorian and bowed low, her eyes never leaving his. "This is Zeri of the House Sileran," the matron intoned. "Trained in the sacred customs of bondmates, loyal, untouched, gifted." The word struck Dorian like a sharp chill. He didn't move, didn't bow, didn't speak. The human ambassador leaned toward him quickly, whispering into his ear, "Don't make a scene. Accept the gesture, Captain. It's symbolic." Symbolic? The woman was standing in front of him with her hands folded and eyes full of quiet, unreadable patience. She didn't speak, didn't protest, didn't smile. She simply waited. Dorian gave the smallest of nods. Enough for the Elverans. Enough for diplomacy. The applause that followed felt far away, like sound passing through vacuum. Zeri stepped to his side silently, her posture perfect, her presence somehow light and weighty at the same time. She said nothing. Later, behind closed bulkhead doors aboard the Galahad, Dorian's composure cracked. "You can't be serious," he snapped at the envoy, pacing across his quarters. "They gave me a person, a sentient being, like a souvenir." "It's not what it seems," the envoy replied, unbothered, busy smoothing the sleeves of his diplomatic robes. "It's tradition." Rejecting her publicly would have collapsed the entire negotiation. You saw how tense they were. "Then I'll unnegotiate. I'll return her." "Captain," the envoy said sharply, turning to face him, "you walk into Elveran territory, play by their rules, and then spit on their customs? Don't be naive. She was trained for this. She knows what it means." Dorian glared, jaw tight. "Does she? Because I sure as hell don't." He left the meeting without another word and found Zeri already aboard. She stood in the crew corridor just outside the assigned guest quarters, head slightly tilted as if listening to something distant. Her eyes found his as he approached, calm, alert, expectant. "You don't have to stay here," he said quietly. She only bowed again. That night, long after the corridor lights dimmed, Dorian sat in his bunk staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what it meant to receive someone like her and why she had looked at him like she was the one offering something. Occasional flicker of aging wall panels, something unspoken drifted through the ship like vapor and awareness, attention. Captain Dorian Vale felt it most in the quiet hours when the crew was asleep and he walked the corridors alone, hands clasped behind his back, each footfall echoing louder than it should. Zeri hadn't said a word since boarding. She had accepted the guest cabin without question, nodding once before stepping inside. No protest, no confusion, no sign of resentment. Dorian had watched her enter, half expecting her to glance over her shoulder, to ask something, anything. But she didn't. The door had slid shut with the same indifferent hiss it gave for everyone else. Still, she was there. He didn't lock the door. Didn't program any surveillance. If she wanted to leave, she could. But she didn't single quotes T. Each morning, her cabin reported normal life signs. A faint heat signature. Controlled oxygen intake. Minimal movement. He ordered meals to be delivered, untouched, by human hands left on the tray unit outside her door. The trays came back empty but never messy. Her presence was too quiet. 3 days passed. Dorian avoided her cabin, yet found his path brushing past it more often than not. Each time he hesitated. Once, he thought he heard her singing soft, wordless melodies that made the ship feel older, like it had lived longer than it let on. On the 4th day, he stood outside her door, tray in hand, about to set down a lunch of seasoned ration packs and imported fruit. The door opened before he could knock. I stood inside, barefoot, robed in a soft gray shift far simpler than the ceremonial garb she'd worn at the banquet. Her hair still shimmered with its faint glow, but her expression was unreadable, like a painting left unfinished. "You do not eat with your crew," she said, her voice soft but crystalline. "Caught off guard," Dorian replied. "Not often. You do not join me. That's not my place." She tilted her head slightly, as if that answer required recalibration. "You assign me a room, provide food, air, gravity, even books." She pointed gently to a corner of her room where a small pile of paperbacks rested, titles ranging from old Terran philosophy to engineering schematics. "These are gifts. They're just resources." "But not freedom," she said. Dorian stiffened. "You're not a prisoner." Zeri stepped forward, not in challenge but curiosity. "Then what am I?" The question sat between them like a knife on the table, visible, sharp, and far too early to touch. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't ask for you to be given, and I certainly don't own you." She blinked slowly. "Yet I remain. Why?" Zeri looked past him then to the far corridor where stars blinked faintly through the observation port. "Because I was taught not to flee from confusion. I was taught to observe, to listen, to learn." "Learn what?" "You," she said. Plainly. Dorian found his breath shallow. "There's nothing special to learn." She looked back at him then, and for the first time he saw the faintest hint of vulnerability beneath her calm. "That is not what the stars say." Before he could respond, she stepped back into her room and closed the door. Not rudely, not abruptly, just closed. That night, Dorian stood in the galley alone, sipping cold coffee and staring at his reflection in the observation glass. Behind him, the ship made no protest. No alert, no malfunction. Yet the air felt charged, like a storm brewing in the vacuum just outside. He told himself she was just one more diplomatic burden. A token, a symbol of alliance. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking, and he didn't know why. What frightened him most wasn't that she had been trained to be loyal. It was that she chose to stay. It was during the simulated night cycle, when the Galahad dimmed its corridors to a soft indigo hue, that Dorian found himself unable to sleep. The overhead vents whispered recycled air in rhythmic sighs, but nothing quieted the noise in his head. Guilt, doubt, the ever-present question of what she wanted from him and why her presence gnawed at the very structure of his command. He rose from his bunk, tossed the emergency blanket aside, and slipped into his uniform pants and boots, shirt forgotten. The ship didn't care what he wore at this hour. Neither did he. He walked. The deck plating was cool under his feet, humming faintly as systems idled beneath. Most of the crew were asleep in their quarters, others on rotation at command or engineering, but he avoided them all. He didn't want to explain why the captain couldn't sleep. He didn't want to explain what it felt like to have someone aboard whose silence was louder than a distress call. As he turned the corner toward the aft observation deck, he stopped. Zeri stood there, not in her quarters, not asleep, but standing barefoot in the middle of the corridor, back straight, gaze lifted to the artificial star panel above. She was wrapped in a long, pale cloak that shimmered like dew, her bioluminescent strands pulsing soft blue with each breath. She turned her head slowly, her golden eyes fixed on him, not startled, not ashamed. "Merely waiting. You are restless," she said. "So are you." Her expression didn't change, but she lowered her gaze, then began walking toward him, graceful, deliberate, like she was tracing a ritual with her steps. He didn't move. When she stood a few feet from him, she stopped and spoke with a quiet certainty that unraveled something deep in his chest. "Captain Vale, is something wrong with me?" The word struck like a direct hit. No subtlety, no build-up. Just a quiet missile to the heart of the matter. "What?" he asked, voice hoarse. "No. Why would you even? You haven't mated me." Dorian stepped back as if struck, his eyes widening. She continued, calm and composed. "On Elveron, to be gifted as a bondmate and then untouched is a mark of rejection, disinterest. I assumed at first you were waiting for a ceremonial phase, or perhaps physical compatibility adjustments, but 8 cycles have passed. You have not even held my hand." His mouth opened, but no words came. Zeri looked at the floor, then met his eyes again, voice soft. "If I have failed in some way, if my form is not pleasing, please tell me. I cannot correct what I do not understand." Dorian's voice cracked free like ice shearing from a frozen hull. "Zeri, no, don't ever think that. There is nothing wrong with you. Nothing at all. Then why do you not complete the bond?" He turned away, running a hand through his hair. Because it wasn't my choice. You weren't mine to choose. You were handed to me like a ceremonial trinket. And I didn't know what it meant to you. The council told me it was symbolic. To you, she said gently, but not to me. He turned back around, chest tightening. "I accepted you," he admitted, "but only because I was told rejecting you would insult your people and collapse everything we built in the treaty. I didn't know you believed it was binding, that it meant you were mine." Zeri stepped closer, slowly, cautiously. "Then what am I?" He shook his head. "Not property, never that, and not an obligation. I didn't know how to treat you. So I gave you space, books, freedom, respect." Her voice was barely audible. "And yet you kept me near. You feed me. You speak my name gently. You healed me when the pressure seal ruptured near the hydroponics wing. You risked your life without hesitation. On Elveron, that is the act of a bonded male. I wasn't performing rituals," he said. "I was doing what any decent person would." "But not all do," she whispered for the first time. Her composure faltered. Her eyes glistened, and her chin dipped slightly as if the weight of not understanding had finally pressed too hard. "I am confused. You act as if you care. You look at me like I matter. But you never claimed me, and yet you never sent me away." Dorian's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to say 1,000 things, that he was afraid, that he didn't trust himself, that every time he looked at her he saw someone he didn't deserve. But none of those things formed into speech. Zeri turned. To leave. Perhaps I am defective. He caught her wrist before she could take another step. Not roughly. Not forcefully. Just enough to stop her. Zeri, he said, voice low and trembling. You're not defective. You're just too much for someone who never believed he deserved anything real. Her hand curled around his, warm and steady. Then perhaps, let me stay until you believe it. The Galahad drifted in the black silence of Sector Thalys, just beyond the burned-out remains of an ancient satellite ring. The ship's hull gleamed faintly under the pale shimmer of a dying binary sun. Inside, lights dimmed to simulate night. Yet no one truly slept. Not after what had been said. Dorian Vale sat alone in the command chair, his posture rigid, knuckles white as they gripped the armrests. The image of Zeri's face, so composed, so heartbreakingly sincere, still played on a loop in his mind. Then perhaps, let me stay until you believe it. That voice, calm yet raw, had cracked something deep in him. He hadn't seen her since. She hadn't returned to her quarters. At least, not in the hours that followed. Internal logs showed no access. He hadn't dared to activate a security trace. She wasn't a threat. Not to the ship. Not to him. No, Zeri was something worse. She was honest, and honesty had always been more dangerous than any plasma rifle. Unable to bear the stillness of the bridge any longer, he stepped into the corridor and began walking. Not aimlessly, no. His feet knew the direction long before his thoughts caught up. The forward observation chamber. It was always where she went when the weight of her own silence became too much. He found her standing beneath a viewport, bathed in starlight and the slow drift of artificial auroras projected onto the glass. Her arms were wrapped loosely around her body, hair glowing dim violet, the lowest pulse he'd seen. The color of sorrow. He cleared his throat. Quietly. Zer, I didn't turn around. You once asked if something was wrong with you, Dorian said. His voice low, steady. But you never asked if something was wrong with me. She spoke without facing him. I already know the answer to that. He stiffened. Do you? You carry shame the way others wear armor. Not to protect yourself, but to remind yourself that pain is earned. That struck too true. He took another step forward. I've done things I regret. So have I, she said softly. But I do not use them as reasons to starve my heart. He hesitated beside her. You think I'm starving? She looked up at the stars. Yes, and yet, you feed others so easily. They stood in silence, breathing in tandem, the quiet between them layered with meaning. He finally asked, Why didn't you leave? Zeri turned to face him now, slowly. Because I didn't come here to be claimed. I came here because I was given, but I stayed because I wanted to be seen. Her hands rose to the sides of her robe, then hesitated. Zeri, Dorian said, voice suddenly tight. You don't have to. I am not undressing, she said gently. I am showing you something. She opened her robe slightly, not to reveal skin, but to uncover a thin set of etched markings across her collarbone and sternum. Faint, crystalline, almost invisible unless caught by light. The Elverin sigil for choice. This was placed on me the moment I reached maturity, she explained. A marker of self-will. No matter the rituals, no matter the gifts exchanged, no bond can form without this mark glowing in acknowledgement. It never did. Not once, until yesterday. Dorian stared, speechless, as the markings began to glow pale gold, then deep amber. It responds not to ceremony, but to emotional resonance, she said. Truth, recognition, connection. And now? He asked. Her voice trembled. Now? It sings. A silence dropped like a curtain. Not emptiness, but weight. Gravity. Dorian stepped closer, his hands slowly reaching for hers. He didn't hold them. Just hovered near, like planets nearing alignment. I'm afraid, he admitted. I know, she said. So am I. I'm not who you think I am. Then let me learn who you are. The starlight above seemed to flicker, catching in the haze of her bioluminescent strands as she tilted her head and smiled, not with victory, but relief. Then the emergency klaxon blared. Red strobes flashed across the deck. The ship lurched hard to port, and Dorian slammed into the bulkhead. Zeri caught herself against the glass. Warning, the ship's AI intoned. Plasma wave detected from binary drift. Impact in 25 seconds. Dorian pushed off the wall, adrenaline surging. Come on. They ran together, her feet gliding across the deck as gracefully as his boots slammed against it. The ship shook again. In the chaos, in the alarms and inertia, one truth burned brighter than the flashing lights. He had feared what she might mean to him, but now he feared losing her far more. The Galahad screamed. Not with sound, no. The void outside allowed no such mercy, but with shutters that rattled bulkheads and made steel groan like a dying leviathan. The plasma wave struck the freighter's port side with a fury rarely seen. Outside war zones, shields collapsed in under 3 seconds. Hull plating scorched. The emergency stabilizers failed to compensate. Inside the ship, chaos bloomed like fire in 0G. Dorian slammed into the side corridor railing just as the second tremor knocked out half the corridor lights. Red auxiliary beacons kicked on, casting the entire deck in a flickering inferno hue. His breath was ragged. He pulled himself upright, clutching a handle near the wall, barking orders into his comm. Bridge. Status. Only static replied. He tapped again. Engineering report. We venting? Another burst of static, then finally, a voice. Main seals compromised. Power rerouting to life support. Secondary batteries won't last through another hit. Before Dorian could reply, a voice came sharp from behind him. Captain. He turned. Zeri stood at the far end of the corridor, hair glowing bright gold, now panic pulsed. Her cloak was torn at the shoulder. A thin line of blood traced down her cheek. She didn't wait for orders. She ran to him, barefoot and silent as always, but her eyes wide with something rawer than fear. Deck 7, she said, gasping. I saw a breach. He frowned. That section was sealed. She shook her head. The doors jammed. And there's a leak in the secondary coolant line. If it reaches the reactor, Dorian didn't wait. He grabbed a toolkit from the emergency locker, tossed one to her without thinking. You know how to reroute the flow? I've studied your manuals. Of course she had. Together they raced down the corridor toward the failing section. As they moved, steam hissed from overhead vents, and the flickering lights made shadows leap like ghosts. Twice they had to vault over fallen pipework. The ship groaned again, deeper this time. Like something ancient and wounded. By the time they reached Deck 7, the pressure alarm was already howling. Zer, I dropped to one knee, bypassed the security panel, and jammed her hand into the exposed override conduit. Sparks flew. She didn't flinch. Dorian pried open the maintenance hatch and crawled into the cramped access shaft. His breath shallow, the heat already unbearable. Talk to me, he called out. Redirecting coolant flow now, Zeri said, fingers dancing over the console. I can slow the buildup, but we need to vent the overpressure manually. The AI's offline in this sector. I'll do it from the inside. Zeri looked up sharply. That shaft leads straight to the core buffer. Radiation. I know. She was on her feet in an instant, pulling at his arm. There has to be another way. There isn't, he said, gripping her wrist, not with force, but to steady them both. If this blows, the treaty won't matter. The ship won't matter. We'll be atoms. Her eyes burned. Then I'm going with you, You'll just slow me down. You've trained me. I've trained myself. Don't ask me to wait and wonder if you'll come back." He cursed under his breath, but nodded once. The two of them entered the shaft. The heat hit like a furnace. Dorian fought to keep his breath even, crawling through the narrow space, glancing back every few seconds to make sure Zeri was still behind him. She moved with precision, sweat slicking her glowing skin, every movement economical. No panic, only purpose. When they reached the buffer junction, Dorian pulled off the casing. The pressure gauge was blinking red. They had maybe 40 seconds. Turn. "The valve when I say," he barked. Zeri dropped beside him and braced herself. He reached into the cluster of piping with a plasma spanner and wrenched the damaged coolant node aside. Steam burst out in a deafening jet. Now. Zeri twisted the emergency valve with both hands. It groaned, resisted, then gave. Coolant hissed outward into the overflow chamber. The pressure gauge dipped, then leveled. Silence. No explosion. No fire, just the hiss of relief and the sound of two bodies breathing like they'd just been pulled from drowning. Dorian slumped back, chest heaving. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "Fine." He looked at her again. She was trembling slightly, knees drawn to her chest, eyes closed. He reached out. Not command, not duty. Just instinct. His hand touched her cheek. "You didn't have to come." Her golden eyes opened. "You didn't have to let me." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For thinking I could carry everything." Alone. Zeri leaned into his touch, her skin warm despite the coolant chill. "Then don't." A long silence passed. The kind that wasn't empty, but full of something unspoken. He nodded. Later. After damage control was underway and the Galahad floated once more in safe drift, Dorian returned to the forward chamber alone. Zeri's pendant was there resting. On the windowsill, the copper band she'd once worn ceremonially had been altered, shaped into a spiral that mirrored the engine coil he'd taught her to calibrate. It gleamed faintly under starlight. He picked it up. The metal was warm, like it remembered her touch. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. He was afraid of what it meant to need her this much. The Galahad limped toward the edges of the Hecarim drift, her engine strained but holding. Emergency patches hissed softly across compromised seams, and the main reactor hummed with uneven cadence, stabilized but still haunted by what nearly tore them apart. The ship had survived the plasma wave, barely, but inside Captain Dorian Vale was breaking in a quieter way. He sat at his desk, hands trembling faintly over a digital schematic of the coolant network, but he wasn't really seeing it. His thoughts were lost in the narrow shaft where he and Zeri had faced death together, her hands gripping the release valve with uncheckable resolve. No hesitation. No fear. Just her glowing eyes locked on his like they were anchoring him to life. She didn't follow orders. She chose him, and he had no idea what to do with that. A soft chime echoed from his door. "Come in," he said, voice raw. It slid open to reveal not Zeri, but Lieutenant Core, the head engineer. The gruff man stood with arms crossed, glancing down at the table display. "She saved our asses," Core said. No preamble. "Just fact. I know. No, Captain. I mean, she really saved us. If she hadn't rerouted the flow in time, we'd be drifting space dust right now. I read the logs. Half our crew couldn't have done what she did." Dorian didn't respond. Core's voice dropped, quieter. "You don't trust her." "It's not about trust," Dorian murmured. "It is. And it's about you two." The man stepped forward. "You keep her at arm's length like she's a bomb waiting to go off. But that girl, she didn't hesitate to dive into hell for this crew. For you. So either give her a place or let her go. But stop treating her like a question you're too scared to answer." The words hit harder than they should have. But Dorian said nothing. Cor left. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It buzzed in Dorian's skull like pressure building. In a faulty pipe, he stood abruptly and left the room. He found her in the hydroponics chamber, where no one else ever went unless they were desperate for real air or rare silence. She stood between rows of violet blossoms, her fingers lightly brushing the petals. Her hair dimmed to soft ocean blue now, serene but unreadable. "You left your pendant," he said. She turned slowly. "I no longer need it to remind me where I belong." Dorian stepped forward, holding the remade copper band in his palm. "But I need something to remember what you did, what you keep doing." "I didn't do it to earn gratitude," she said gently. "I did it because you matter." He couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, he said, "I've spent my whole life afraid that if I let someone in, I'd let them down, that I'd lose them, that I'd break them." Zeri moved closer, her feet silent on the garden floor. "I am not glass." "No," he said. "You're gravity." Her breath caught slightly. He held out the pendant. "I went to the market at Port Lyris once," he said, "before the treaty. I saw a vendor selling Elveran crafts. One caught my eye, a pair of comets spiraling around each other without ever touching. I didn't understand it then. I do now." She took the pendant carefully, as if afraid it would disappear. "This isn't a bond," he said. "Not by ritual, not by treaty. It's a choice, mine." Zeri looked up at him, eyes glowing brighter now, not with light, but emotion. "And mine? That's what I've been afraid to ask." "Then ask." He did, without words. He stepped forward and touched her hand, held it. Not command, not possession, just presence. "Will you stay?" he whispered. "Because you want to?" Zeri's smile was quiet, luminous. Finally, the hydroponics lights dimmed slightly, the soft hum of the ship folding into something warmer, gentler. A rhythm between two hearts no longer pretending they were apart. She leaned into him not for support, not for obligation, but because this time she had chosen him just as surely as he had chosen her, and in that moment every fear he had ever carried of power imbalance, of unspoken rules, of crossing lines burned away, leaving only a man and a woman standing side by side under artificial starlight, ready to begin again. The Galahad soared through the quiet vastness beyond the Hecaran drift, repaired but not fully healed. Its crew moved with renewed energy, not because the systems were optimal, they weren't, but because the near-death wake-up had shaken something deep in all of them. Captain Dorian Vale no longer hid behind closed doors. He walked the corridors with steadier steps, his voice clearer over the comms. His presence felt like a captain again, and for the first time in years, like a man alive, but none of that, compared to the silence between two hearts that had once feared each other, and now stood on the precipice of something more. The repairs were nearly done. The ship had one final stop, a fuel exchange at the Zikari station before returning to Terran space. A simple transaction. Just protocol. But Zeri hadn't spoken since they'd left the drift. Not cold. Not withdrawn. "Just quiet dot at first, Dorian." Let it pass. He didn't want to pressure her. But by the third day, he couldn't ignore it. She stood by the ship's viewport again, her eyes fixed on a cluster of nebulae in the distance, rose-colored plumes like fading memory. Her reflection in the glass shimmered with her hair's bioluminescent threads, now glowing silver-white, the Elveran color of stillness. He approached softly, but she sensed him, always did. "You're far away," he said. She nodded once. "So is my world. You miss it?" Zeri tilted her head. "No, I mourn it. That is different." Dorian leaned beside her. "Tell me." "There is a moment in Elveran bonding rituals," she said, "when a chosen one may release all ties to their house and take the house of their bonded partner. But it is irreversible. One name for another. one life shed for another worn. He frowned. That sounds like erasure. Only if the choice is made under pressure, but when made freely, it is the deepest act of love we know. He inhaled slowly. Are you saying you want to give up your past? I already have, she whispered. I simply haven't told you. That stopped him. Zeri turned to face him, and her eyes were not unsure, not trembling, not desperate. They were radiant, strong. You gave me freedom before you gave me love, she said. You saw me as more than a symbol, more than a gift. That is why I chose you, but I need to know. If I choose your world, will it choose me back? Dorian looked at her for a long, breathless moment. Then he did something he hadn't done since command school. He broke protocol. The Galahad arrived at Zeri station ahead of schedule, but Dorian delayed the fuel transfer. Instead, he requested access to the diplomatic commons. Zeri stood at his side, wearing her copper pendant, now intertwined with a Terran fiber, crest handcrafted by the crew engineer who quietly passed it to Dorian with a wink. A circle of ambassadors waited in the marble-paneled hall, surprised by the visit, more surprised by the declaration. I'm not here on behalf of the Terran fleet, Dorian said. I'm here on behalf of myself, Captain Dorian Vale of the Galahad. And I wish to declare a voluntary bond not as part of any treaty, but between two sentient people, across cultures, by choice. The hall fell into hushed whispers. The Elveran representative stood, her robes trailing like mist. You are aware that such declarations carry implications across systems? Dorian nodded. I am. I don't care. Zeri stepped forward. I have no house now. I gave it freely. What I carry with me is enough. The representative hesitated, then smiled, then let it be entered. It was done. Not a fanfare, not a spectacle, but a simple act witnessed by both stars and history. That night, back aboard the Galahad, the stars outside shimmered with no agenda, no politics, no laws, only silence. Zeri stood by the captain's cabin, her form lit by ambient glow. Dorian opened the door, not as command, but as welcome. They didn't rush. They didn't speak vows. They simply lay beside one another, the quiet between them a language of its own. Later, wrapped in the silence, Zeri whispered, There was a time I thought something was wrong with me, that my form, my silence, my presence was a burden. Dorian touched her cheek gently. There's nothing wrong with you, Zeri. There was something wrong with what I thought love had to be. She smiled against his palm. And now? Now I know better. They didn't need rituals. They didn't need permission. What they had was forged in airlocks and corridors, in quiet courage and mutual defiance of custom. It was made not in fire, but in the choices they made again and again to stay, to protect, to understand. Two lives once gifted, now given freely,